Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So we'll wait for a few minutes since it's not time yet.
My understanding is there was a debate in Iowa yesterday and then one in North Carolina today. Were you at both of those?
Uh, well, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm very sorry for the backdrop. I'm driving back from North Carolina, and I have pulled over to do this interview. I'm about an hour or about 50 minutes from home, but I figured I just would pull over rather than keep driving. So
All
I
right.
apologize for that. Yes, I did the Iowa one by Zoom from my hotel room in North Carolina, and then we had a 3-hour debate today, which just went longer than I thought. I thought I could get back in time, but I obviously failed to do that.
Oh, well, thanks for making the time because I
Yeah, thank
know
you.
all you guys have a lot of stuff on your plate for sure. That's that's a lot.
It's an honor and a pleasure.
Is that debate from today? Is that online somewhere?
I don't know because I took off right afterward. They usually take some time to process it, so I would assume it's going to be a couple of days before they get it up there.
Okay.
I know they did record it.
Nice. So I'll look forward to trying to catch that one. I've seen only a couple of them, so trying
I
to
I,
see some more.
I really think that may have been one of the top three. They had
Okay.
a different format, which was very interesting. That they gave each candidate a 10-minute talk to start out the debate, which was fantastic because most of these debates, there's you get a 2-minute opening and 2-minute answers, and you can't say anything substantive in 2 minutes. With 10 minutes, everybody could get their vision across as to what kind of candidate they would be. It was really good.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it was a first class debate, and I was very impressed with it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to checking that one out then, especially if you guys got to really get some time to get your thoughts out instead of it being short, stunted.
exactly. I mean, the 2 minutes like a straitjacket.
Yeah.
uh, the,
Hey, Jessica.
Hey everyone.
So I imagine the next convention you're going to be attending is the Virginia one, right?
no, the next one's this weekend in Missouri on Friday night, and then California on Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'll be at California, so Jessica. So
Very
we'll see
much
you there.
looking forward to it. Looking forward to meeting you. My dad's been a fan for a very long time.
Your daughter or your dog?
My dad. Sorry, I have a cold. My voice is really messed up. Um, actually, yeah, it's coming down. It's getting better. My dad, I remember him talking about you like 25 years ago.
Oh, that's so nice.
So,
Thank
I'm
you.
excited to meet you. Maybe I'll bring a book or something of his, but
Oh, that's very
I don't know.
nice. I look forward to seeing the both of you there.
Yeah.
I'll be at the Virginia convention in March, early March. So
I'll be there in the morning, and then
okay.
I drive to Pennsylvania for the night one.
Hmm.
Man, there's so many.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, we had a break over Super Bowl weekend. It was so nice, and now we got 6 weekends in a row.
Mhm.
Pretty funny. Uh, so, Albert,
Have
I see some palm trees in your background there. Where are you?
I'm actually in Virginia, but I just like that background because that's my, I guess, my aspiration is to be in an environment like that, you know?
I thought you were in the Caribbean or something.
Yeah.
I was envying you.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we should wait a few more minutes. I know we've had more attendance in past meetings. So, um,
Yeah, even our Super Bowl one had more, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like the X Spaces ones were the best attended, but the good thing about the Zoom ones is, you know, you have a recording link and you can you know, we can post it for a long time in the future. So
Yeah, that's what makes it nice. And that probably encourages people to say, I don't need to attend right now. I can watch
right.
it later. Yeah. And is this invitation goes out to the members of your caucus?
Yes, to both the Christian caucus and our caucus, the Pro-Life Caucus.
Okay.
And we put it on some other Facebook pages as well.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and once the interview is done, I will submit the link. So you'll have a copy of the link, and everyone here will have a copy of the link, and they can post it wherever they want to post it.
That's perfect.
You know.
I'll post it on my website for sure.
Well, Kara and Greg, should we begin? Do you
Sure.
think? Okay. So I'm Albert Veldhuizen, and I'm joined by Kara Smith, who's the founder of the Christian Caucus. I'm the secretary of the Pro-Life Caucus, and Greg Lapointe is the founder of the Center for Natural Law. And so, what we'd like to do, first of all, is to give a brief introduction to our different groups, and then we'll go from there. So I'll just like to leave it up to you, Kara, to start. And so go ahead and just give us a little background of your organization.
Okay. Hi. So I founded the Christian Caucus with a couple other people, and we haven't been around super long. We kind of just got born basically last April. So we've been just trying to find our footing. We've done a couple of things, like we were lobbying for defunding Planned Parenthood recently, try to help out a little bit with promoting the efforts with Defend the Guard, doing the interviews with the Pro-Life Caucus and Center for Natural Law. And we have a Discord server where we communicate and we talk about different things that are relevant to our caucus. So we're just kind of looking to focus on issues that are important to Christians within the liberty movement, because of course there's certain things that are more important and that we need to focus on to glorify God. So we, in addition to getting the state out of things, we're really interested in the other side of things, which is voluntarism, and kind of emphasizing and promoting that side of things as well. That's basically what we're about, and I'll let Albert go ahead and go.
Okay, Greg, you want to say a little bit about the Center for Natural Law?
Yeah, the Natural Law was founded in 2011, and it promotes a perennial tradition of natural law. There are a few various versions, but there really is only one natural law, actually. And it is the science of natural human design. It promotes individual freedom and emphasizes family and community. It de-emphasizes government regulation and involvement. So it really promotes freedom and liberty of the individual and family and community. Natural law also really justifies the libertarian political position. It is the science that justifies and establishes libertarianism. So we promote it generally and specifically, and so we do a number of activities to promote the natural law.
Okay, so I'll give a little background on the Pro-Life Libertarian Caucus. Pro-lifers have always been active within the Libertarian Party since its founding, but for a long time we were kind of a disorganized minority, and it seems like ever since, or for many years, the pro-lifers had tried to abolish the abortion plank, and that came up perennially pretty much at every single convention. But there was no kind of unifying organization. And so in 2020, a bunch of us, myself and Russell Brooksbank and a few others, got together and we formed the Pro-Life Libertarian Caucus. And we made a concerted effort that year in 2020 to abolish the abortion plank. And we came closest that we'd ever come to abolishing the plank. We got about 45% of the vote at the time. And but then 2 years later, we were successful thanks to our organizational efforts and also to publicizing our efforts and also making inroads in other caucuses. And significantly, the Mises Caucus supported that effort. And so in 2020 and 2022, Russell Brooksbank, our chairman, made the motion from the floor to abolish the abortion plank. And in 2022, we got over 65% of the vote. So that was a resounding success. The caucus's goal at this point is to maintain that and to strengthen the trend in the Libertarian Party toward a more pro-life position. And I'll just quote from our preamble, which says that the Libertarian Party stands for the protection of the rights of the smallest minority, the individual. We cannot think of an individual that needs more protection than a preborn person. So we believe that a pro-life stance is the correct stance for the Libertarian Party. We strive to move the culture of the Libertarian Party towards that stance by supporting candidates for party leadership, nominees to public office, changes to our platform, and education of fellow members. So that's in a nutshell what the Pro-Life Libertarian Caucus stands for. So starting out with you and your background, and I know you've been involved in libertarian politics for many years, and just want to reason why you decide to run again and what your main focus will be.
Okay, well, I'm Jacob Hornberger, and my campaign website is jacobforliberty.com. And I don't know when you started recording, but if it was after my explanation as to why I'm using this backdrop, let me just explain to anybody viewing in that I'm driving back from the North Carolina Libertarian Party convention, and I got caught before I got home. So I've pulled over to do this interview, and that's why the strange backdrop of my Forerunner here. I grew up in Laredo, Texas, border town. I spent almost half my life on the border, which was very formative for me, especially with respect to this immigration position. I grew up on a farm on the Rio Grande and went off to college at Virginia Military Institute. I got commissioned an infantry officer in the U.S. Army, went to law school at the University of Texas, and became a trial attorney back in Laredo and later in Dallas, both civil and criminal trial work, and both in federal court and in state court. And I did that for some 12 years. And then, but my real passion became in my late 20s, libertarianism. I discovered libertarianism and it changed the course of my life. It was a true road to Damascus experience. So at some point when I was in my 30s, I got offered a job at the Foundation for Economic Education in New York. And that was the real soul searching time because I knew this was the turning point in my life. And so I gave up the law practice, which I'd wanted to do as a kid, to pursue my passion. And so I went to New York, stayed there for 2 years. And then after 2 years, I decided to start the Future of Freedom Foundation. And that's what I've been doing for 34 years. And our mission there is to present a principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. And while we don't get into religious issues per se, I'm a devout Catholic, and my Catholicism, my Christianity undergirds my political philosophy. I mean, I'm a firm believer in natural rights, natural law. What distinguishes my campaign from all of my opponents and why I'm seeking this nomination is that I'm not interested in reforming the welfare warfare state. That's the message we've been running for 20 years, a message of reform. To me, reform is inadequate because it's not freedom. Freedom necessarily entails a dismantling of infringements on freedom rather than their reform. But then there's the strong moral element, the religious element here for me, that when you support any aspect of the welfare state, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, any other socialist program, to me that is a direct violation of the central principles of voluntarism that Kira was talking about in the Christian faith. And it still boggles my mind how any Christian can support any initiation of force and how they consider this type of thing caring or compassion. It's the exact opposite. Caring and compassion can come only from the willing heart of the individual, never through the coercive apparatus of government, the Internal Revenue Service, the Social Security Administration, the Medicaid, Medicare agency. And then we've got the killing machine that the federal government is. Martin Luther King called it the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. There is no way to reconcile these invasions, assassinations, sanctions, embargoes against innocent people with any principle of the Christian faith. And that's the second reason. The first reason I'm running is because I want to be free, and reform doesn't get me freedom. And the second reason I'm running is to bring an end to this killing machine that we've lived under all of our lives for the federal government.
Okay, Kara, do you have any questions?
Forgot I was muted for a second. All right, sure. Thanks, Jacob, for your introduction. So I'll go ahead and jump right to the border issue since I noticed you brought it up. Your formative years were in a border town. I'm from San Diego, so I grew up, semi close to the border myself. I would like you to elaborate a little bit about your position on the border, but kind of like within the context of when you talk about dismantling the state, do you think it's important that there is an order to things, or just like, for example, like that we have the welfare state? Is it important to get rid of that first before we open the borders? Do you think it matters in which way we start dismantling the state, or just as much as we can, wherever we can, just start dismantling, no matter which order, what other things are still in place, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. Let me first say that I don't favor dismantling the state. I favor dismantling the illegitimate functions of the state. I believe the state serves a valuable role in going after murderers and rapists and thieves and other people that initiate force against others, force or fraud. But there are illegitimate functions. And let me just start out with the border issue with the religious argument. The edict is, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And that doesn't just mean your next door neighbor. It talks about your fellow man. And for all my life, growing up on the border, I've seen a system that treats people like garbage. Death, suffering, rapes, kidnappings, detention centers, for the simple act of crossing a border. Now, from the libertarian standpoint, the core principle of our philosophy is the non-aggression principle. That is that we even take a vow, a pledge, to never initiate force against anybody. When I crossed the border from North Carolina into Virginia, I did not initiate force against anybody. I didn't violate anybody's rights. In fact, I didn't even know I'd crossed the border because there's no big red line that says this is the border. The only way I knew it is a sign that said, welcome to Virginia. Well, that principle applies universally. When somebody crosses any border, he is not initiating force or violating rights. And it is the entity that interferes with that free movement that's initiating force. And that's what's happened over the last 80 years. Now, let me give you the economic argument here. This is a government program that is based on the socialist principle of central planning. That is, the government plans the movements of people across borders, millions of people. And they allocate how many total number, how much from each country, what the credentials will be. Well, central planning always leads to what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. There is no way around it. It's just planned chaos. And that's what we've had along the border. There's no way that government can centrally plan something like this. This is one of the most complex labor markets in history and movements of people. So it's not surprising that you end up with this chaos. So what is the answer to this? Well, let me analogize. Let me shift gears for a second over to the drug war, and we can delve more deeply into that issue. But we've got a giant crisis with the drug war. And everybody recognizes it, cartels, violence. So what's the solution to that crisis? Well, I think most libertarians would say, well, the solution is just end the drug war. It's like a no-brainer for us. Just legalize drugs, which is what I favor. I don't favor just legalizing marijuana. Legalize all drugs, and the crisis goes away. The cartels disappear. Everything is resolved. Now, somebody might say, but Jacob, the addicts will go on Medicaid. This could result in higher taxes for us. That's not going to stop me from standing for what's right. The right thing is to stand for drug legalization and the end of this thing, even if it does result in higher taxes. If that's the price to pay, I'm willing to pay that price. But focus on abolishing Medicaid and Medicare and these social welfare programs. Don't join up with those that are calling for the continuation of the drug war simply because people might go on Medicaid. It's the same with the immigration situation. If people have a right to cross borders, which I am firmly believe they do, to seek a better life, to save their families, that if that possibly ends up with people going on welfare, which results in higher taxes, I'm willing to pay that price. I will never, ever abandon my principles of liberty simply because it happens to pinch in the form of, let's say, we have to stand for what's right. Religiously stand for what's right, morally stand for what's right, and economically stand for what's right, and then focus on getting rid of the wrongdoing, which is the welfare state. But we should never abandon our principles because it's going to pinch in the form of higher taxes.
So if I was understanding,
So to answer your question directly, get rid of these things immediately, because there is no argument for the continuation of wrongdoing. And what we're doing there is wrongdoing, treating human beings in this fashion.
so just so I can be clear, it wouldn't matter if we continue to have the welfare state. You think we should try to, of course, abolish that. But given that we have it, you would say still open the borders as much as possible also while we're fighting for that, even though we don't have it.
Absolutely, without a doubt, because it's the right position. I hate going into studies because there's always studies on both sides, but there are some studies from the open border standpoint that says immigrants produce much more in prosperity than the small percentage that goes on welfare. I mean, in fact, it's very difficult for an immigrant to go on welfare. But they bring up the pro border control people bring up emergency rooms or public schooling and the like. My argument is that to interfere with a vast number of people's rights, many of whom may not go on welfare, they may not have children in public schools, they may never visit an emergency room, and you're destroying their rights because of the fear that a small minority might go on welfare and result in an increase of taxes. For me, that is an inexcusable way to advocate the violation of rights. You've got to stick with what's right, what's morally right, what's religiously right, what's economically right, regardless of the fact that it might result in the payment of higher taxes because people are going on welfare.
Okay, so just one other little aspect I'll touch on, just your thoughts on the welfare state that we have is kind of in this weird border situation is incentivizing people to make that journey that's ending with lots of deaths and rapes and all kinds of weird human trafficking things. And what is your thoughts on those aspects of the kind of like the way it's set up right now?
I challenge that premise. Most immigrants come over here because they want to make money. It's a very difficult thing to change countries. It takes a very special person, a person with real intestinal fortitude. I mean, I would venture to say most Americans could not handle moving to a foreign country. It's very, very difficult. Getting employment, speaking the language, leaving your family, leaving your culture. So most immigrants are not coming over here to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to go get on welfare, because you don't get rich on welfare. Nobody gets rich on welfare. And American employers love to hire immigrants because they're the hardest working people you'd ever find. And so I would challenge the premise of that. Now, what was the second part of your question?
I don't remember, but I will just say in San Diego, like just locally, our county recently voted to put aside extra millions of dollars to help process and, take care of the illegal immigrants that have come in. So this is affecting us financially, and California is now providing healthcare, which even includes, which will lead me to my next question, gender transitioning and stuff like that, of that nature, like full medical care benefits. So we don't have to worry about them just going to the emergency room, because now our taxpayer dollars in California are actually just going to cover all of their medical expenses, no matter what their, status is with immigration. So what I would like to ask you about the gender transitioning things. What is your take on that?
Well, let me first answer your question, because I remember what you were bringing up about the deaths.
Okay.
And the rapes and so forth. This is all part of this system. I mean, this is why I want to emphasize so much. I've emphasized this for 30 years. I wrote a book, I published a book called The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration. All of this travesty that you're seeing is rooted in this system. The system is the cause. Because if you don't have these restrictions, people cross borders like ordinary human beings. They drive across or walk across the international bridge, just like crossing a bridge across the Mississippi. They head north, or they fly into the United States. I mean, look at the United States. This is my model. The United States domestically is the largest free trade, open immigration zone in history. I mean, people cross state borders freely without seeing any checkpoints and so forth. So you don't see the rapes and the kidnappings and the transporters and the trafficking. You don't see any of that because you have open borders. The same thing applies to the international border. All of this trafficking and stuff is rooted in this system. And so then what do the statists do? Refugees come in, they circumvent the controls. They're always going to circumvent the controls because they're trying to save themselves. Any family is going to circumvent controls to save its family. And so then they build up the structure that you described, like a refugee camp, assistance for the refugees. None of this is necessary, but it's built into the system. With open borders, government gets out of the process entirely, and you get rid of this ridiculous green card system. So people are free to work. They don't have to go get permission to work. So you don't need these government centers to handle people in an open border system. People just come in, they manage for themselves, they have family members, they get jobs. There is absolutely no need for government assistance whatsoever. The only reason this government assistance thing starts to arise is because their system itself that they won't dismantle. And I've said for 30 years, you dismantle the system, and it's the only solution. There is no other solution. I told you I grew up on the border. I've seen this thing all my life, Kara, all my life. When I was in high school, I got stopped by the Border Patrol traveling to Corpus Christi, Texas for no reason at all. They would come onto our farm without a warrant and bust our workers. Our workers were illegal immigrants. They were the hardest working people you've ever seen. This crisis is not new. And there is only one solution to it, and that is open borders. I mean, if there had been a solution to make their system work, they would have figured it out by now. It's been 80 years or so. They don't have a solution to it, and that's why they come up with all these little rigmarole, Rube Goldberg schemes to ameliorate the consequences of their own dysfunctional, evil, malevolent system.
You went dark on us. Sorry.
Oh, it could be my. Okay. There you go. Okay.
There we go.
I have a follow-up on the immigration question. We talk a lot about welfare and schools and free medical care and things like that that immigrants get, but embedded within the INS system, it seems like there are a lot of subsidies because they get free food, free transportation, and other subsidies provided by the INS that make it easier for them to come in, and then they're basically released into the public, and they don't have to come back for their hearing. So do you think that it's as part of that, it would be important to get rid of those subsidies at the same time that you would, let's say, have an open border? And we effectively do have an open border, don't we? With everyone coming in and they're not being sent back. So isn't that what we have right now?
Absolutely not. On the contrary, you have a police state that's not working and has never worked. Let me describe to you what a police state is, Albert. A police state is the opposite of a free society. A police state is highway checkpoints that stop people for no reason at all and subject them to complete searches. That's what living life is like in the Southwest and in Texas. When you leave Laredo, Texas, you head north to San Antonio on IH-35 and about 40 miles north of the city. You think you're still in Mexico because you all of a sudden approach this immigration checkpoint. It's the weirdest, surreal thing you've ever seen, where they can tell you to get out of your car, show your papers, open your trunk, even though you've never been to Mexico. That's a police state. When people can come onto your farm or ranch, like they would with us, without a warrant, and if you locked your gate, they'd shoot off the gate, the Border Patrol. That's a police state. When they have violent raids on American businesses that are supposedly hiring the wrong people, that's a police state. When they're boarding Greyhound buses and demanding to see people's papers, and if they're dark-skinned and they speak Spanish, which many people on the border do, they will not let them go forward if they don't have papers. And I know this from personal experience from having a nanny growing up that lived with us, and she could never head north if she didn't take her passport. And she's an American citizen. And then you've got the border wall there, which is a replica of the Berlin Wall. So the idea that we have open borders now is really fallacious. What we have is a police state that isn't working. Okay, so when people circumvent this police state, the mindset is we need to double down on the police state. We need to militarize the border, which is what Biden and Trump both favor, sending the military down there. We need to expand the Berlin Wall. Now we got to get concertina wire to cut people up. Tell me how that's reconciled with Christian principles. And it's already killed somebody. So what you've got is a massive police state that has never worked. It continues to not work, and it will never work. Open borders is the abolition of the Border Patrol, the abolition of ICE, and the abolition of all restrictions on the free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. Now, to go back to your original question, is it necessary or beneficial to abolish these welfare state programs at the same time? Absolutely. I mean, I don't question that at all. Look, I advocate the abolition of these programs. My opponents in this race do not. They favor, for example, the 25-year continuation of Social Security, which is the crown jewel of American socialism, which, by the way, immigrants fund through their payment of taxes. And then they also favor the indefinite continuation of Medicare and Medicaid, because they say people would die in the streets. So then they use this welfare state that they continue to say should be continued as the excuse to say, well, let's violate the rights of people crossing borders. My argument is never, ever join the statists in the support of their program, especially as a Christian, that if you believe that open borders is the genuine Christian principle, which I believe, it is absolutely morally repugnant for me to violate the principles of my faith simply because it's going to result or might result in the payment of higher taxes. I mean, how would I sleep at night thinking that I have violated the principles of my faith simply because I was going to have to pay $1,000 more a year in taxes because they've got this welfare state program. I couldn't sleep with myself. You got to stand for what's right in terms of the principles of liberty, and at the same time advocate the dismantling of the programs that people are using as the excuse to violate these fundamental human religious rights.
Yeah, you said earlier that you do believe that the state has a role in preventing violations of the non-aggression principle. What about immigrants that we know, such as gangs and human traffickers and others who've been identified as criminals who have committed crimes? Wouldn't some sort of border security be necessary to prevent those people from coming in?
Absolutely not. Any more than we have those kind of security arrangements between the states. People are convicted of crimes in New York, and they pay their price, they serve their time, and they're free to travel into Virginia. We don't keep them out of Virginia just because they've been convicted of a previous crime. Same thing applies to people in foreign countries. And keep in mind also that a crime in a foreign country is often kind of a bizarre crime. People convicted of open dissent in Cuba. Do we want to keep those people out because they're considered a convict in Cuba? I don't think so. So if somebody has a criminal record, presumably they've paid the price for that, and they should be free to exercise basic human rights. If they commit another crime, a legitimate crime, the initiation of force, then they get punished for that crime. That's our system of justice. In fact, right now, we don't keep out people from Canada or because they've been guilty of DUI in Canada or something like that. At least I don't think we do. But if they do, I totally oppose that. Once you pay your price, then you should be free to exercise your basic human rights.
Yeah, I guess I was getting more to the point of people who violate the non-aggression principle, like murderers and rapists and human traffickers. And, if the police have identified those individuals, then it might be and they would pose a danger to American residents. It might be something that that the Border Patrol would be entitled to do, is to keep them out of the country.
Then why not do it for states also? I mean, there's murderers that have been convicted of murder in New York. Why not keep them? Why not state officials in Virginia be able to keep those people out of Virginia?
Well, I guess that gets to the whole concept of whether, the state is within the nation of the United States. So you're making no distinction between, let's say, the United States and other nations like Mexico. Then what is the purpose of the border? And is there a purpose for the military to defend the border? Since that's the purpose of the military, right? To defend the nation. So where does the border come in? Is there not a qualitative difference between the border between us and Mexico and us and Canada and the border between Virginia and North Carolina?
I totally disagree with you, with your premise that it is the role of the military to defend the border. It is not the role of the military to enforce criminal laws in the United States. We've never wanted to do this. Posse comitatus. The role of the military
about a foreign invasion, for example.
Absolutely.
Many people think that thousands and thousands of people coming into the country is like a foreign invasion.
Well, go ahead.
And to some extent, you have these armed gangs with very high-powered weapons who are actually crossing the border with their weapons. So isn't that an armed invasion?
Let me ask you this. When Russia invaded Ukraine, do you think the Ukrainian people have a right to kill Russian soldiers coming across?
Yes.
Into Ukraine? Okay. So why, I assume then that if you consider these immigrants to be invaders, you have no problem with people going down there and shooting and killing them.
Well, it depends on the circumstance. I mean, if you have an armed gang that's crossing the border, that's different than unarmed civilians who are just crossing in. looking for work. So I mean, it's a different situation.
Well, there's people that say that these immigrants that are circumventing the police state are invaders. And you've got a guy from Dallas that went to El Paso and started shooting people up at Walmart and killing them because he figured they're invaders. And he's like a Ukrainian. He has a right to kill the invaders. The notion that immigrants crossing the border and circumventing a police state are invaders is absolutely nonsensical. Let me tell you what an invasion is. An invasion is what the federal government did to the people of Iraq. Bombs, missiles, troops, death, destruction, drone attacks, assassinations, indefinite detention, torture. That is what an invasion is. Immigrants that are seeking to save their lives, improve their lives, are crossing borders in an entirely peaceful manner. 100% of, well, I shouldn't say 100%, 99% of them are unarmed. There's many women, children, men. This talk of invasion is very, very dangerous. And whenever I get an email from somebody that tells me about the invaders, I give them free legal advice. I told you I was a lawyer for 12 years. I give them free legal advice. I say, don't go to the border and shoot any of these people as invaders, because I guarantee you, you will be indicted either in state or federal court for murder, and you will be sent to a penitentiary for a long time, because this is not an invasion. And now, your question about the armed gang, you know, the much of the problem we face in this country, Albert, is that the American people are among the most frightened people in the world, which is really ironic because we live under the most powerful government. And I think there's a link there. The more powerful your government, the weaker your nation, the weaker your people. Americans are scared of terrorists, Muslims, illegal immigrants, drug dealers. I mean, and they're willing to trade their liberties. We saw this after 9/11, you know. You pass the Patriot Act, just do anything to keep me safe. The probability that an armed gang is going to come from Mexico and kill you is so minimal that to have a massive police state there that is not even effective in stopping it. I mean, you'd be surprised at how many Border Patrol are down there, how many DEA agents are down there. It's a veritable police state. And if anybody wants to get through, they can get through this police state. We know this. I mean, you yourself pointed it out that you felt like we have open borders because there's so many people down there. What I'm saying is that we have surrendered our liberty in this country for the pretense of safety and security. And we haven't gotten it because you're still scared of those armed gangs, no matter how fortified the border has become. And so what is the natural tendency of somebody that has this fear? Send the troops down like North Korea. Protect me, keep me safe from these dangers. There is no danger. I mean, well, except that life is insecure. You know, several years ago, there was some snipers coming from Maryland into Virginia, and they were killing people at random from Maryland. And well, at least the suspicion was they were from Maryland, and the suspicion turned out to be right, but it was creepy. You'd go and pump gas and people just shoot you, and these guys would just shoot you, and nobody knew who it was. Well, nobody called for border controls between Virginia and Maryland to protect us from these assassins, because everybody understands that. Okay, bad things happen in life, but you don't ever want to trade your liberty for the sense of security.
Okay, what do you make of the property rights argument that some of your fellow libertarian candidates are making? And basically they're advocating for an invitation basis system. How would you respond to that?
It's a ridiculous argument. Look, when you're talking about invitation, you're not talking about freedom. And again, I analogize it to the domestic United States, the open border system we have. If Virginia, and one of my opponents in this race wants domestic border controls. He wants the states to be able to do what the federal government does on the southern border. He wants each state to be able to have its own border restrictions and its own border patrol. So when I analogize this, it's not something just hypothetical. It's something one of my opponents really wants. And so if you have this domestic system of invitations, you couldn't enter Virginia from Maryland without an invitation. Well, imagine the crisis that would produce. There's like 250,000 cars that cross the Potomac River every day. Imagine if you put a checkpoint there that establishes a system of invitation. All of a sudden, you've got a major crisis. And then as people start circumventing and start swimming across the Potomac, then you need border guards there, and you need a border patrol there. And all of a sudden, you've got a major crisis. So this invitation system is the direct violation of liberty. When you have to get permission to engage in a human right, the exercise of a human right, you are not free. For example, licensure laws. When you have to get permission to be a lawyer or a doctor or a hairdresser or a shoe shine person, you're not free, because you shouldn't have to ask for permission to do what is a natural right. I mean, we were talking earlier with Greg about natural rights. Natural rights come to us from nature and God. This is what Jefferson points out in the Declaration of Independence. We don't have to ask for permission of government to exercise these rights. They pre-exist government. They're endowed in us by the Creator. And so when the proponents of this system say, oh, well, no, Jacob, we need to have a system where people have to ask for permission to come in. Oh, where only the government extends these invitations. That's the system we have. I mean, this is the central planning system I was talking about. You cannot come into the United States without official permission or official invitation. That's the system these proponents of immigration controls are advocating. And inevitably, you get the police state that comes with it. Now, they don't talk about the police state. Notice this, because it makes them uncomfortable. But the fact is, they favor this police state just as any supporter of lightning favors thunder, because it comes with it. So I totally oppose this whole concept that people should have to get permission to exercise what are natural God-given rights.
Kara, sorry to have, I guess, taken over, but you're asking some questions. So
No, that's fine, because I know that your follow-up was to that, and I was about to jump to another topic, so that's totally fine. Okay, we'll move on though, because I feel like we don't want to do all border, even though it is kind of a big issue right now. So I'll go into what I was going to jump into, which is the gender stuff. Where do you stand on all the gender stuff? And I don't know why that emoji pops up. I'm not even touching my screen. Okay. So what are your thoughts about the gender medical affirmations, and as far as like in general with minors, is there a difference? What is your take on that whole situation and issue?
Well, let me first talk about adults. I think people who are adults should be able to live their lives any way they choose. And it's up to them to decide what they want to do to their body in any way they want. It's no business of the state. And I am one of those libertarians that I don't butt into other people's business. People make their life choices. I'm not going to sit here and condemn them or judge them or whatever. Now, I figure I got to live my own life and try to live my life according to what I think the dictates of my conscience are. I really don't have time or interest in butting into other people's decisions. That's their affairs, and I respect their right to live their lives the way they want. Children are in a totally different category. I served 3 terms on the platform committee, and we always had a hard time drafting the children's rights plank, because it is difficult. We want to default to the idea that the family is in control of the family. And we want the family to make the decisions on what's in the best interest of the children and the family. But then there's limits on that. For example, we don't want any sex abuse of children. We don't want any physical abuse of children. And so the state has a legitimate role in intervening if a parent is engaging in that type of thing with a child. And then there's the question of drugs. Should children be free to take drugs? Well, it's a difficult issue. Where do you draw the line there? If a parent wants to give a 16-year-old a glass of wine with dinner, do we want the state to intervene with that? Well, what if the state wants to introduce his child, a 16-year-old, to cocaine? Does the state have a legitimate interest in intervening? These are difficult issues, and I'm not sure there's real black and white answers. If you're talking about an 8-year-old, it is black and white, in my opinion, with respect to drugs or wine or beer or whatever. Now on the transgender thing, I think that any family should be free to engage in conversations, counseling, go to therapists, engage in any kind of oral communication with respect to any kind of sexual dysphoria that a child is experiencing. I draw the line where there is some kind of life-changing, permanent situation like surgery. I would say the state has a role of intervening and saying, no, you wait till the child reaches 18, because the child presumably does not have the mental capability of making that decision. And so anything that is permanent and life-changing, I say absolutely not. The state has the right, the legitimate power to intervene. But in terms of just counseling and talking and trying to work things out, I say the state should butt out.
Okay, so I just have one follow-up question that just kind of came to me while you were talking about this. We have not normally talked about the adults, and so when it comes to adults, because it does seem like, you know, like I've read some stuff about this, like ever since gay marriage got legalized, a lot of these advocacy groups switched to the transgender stuff, and that's kind of why some people theorize that it's kind of exploded into the mainstream in the past 5 or 6 years or so. And I'm just wondering, with this affirmation model and a lot of clinicians seeming to not do their due diligence and just kind of push people forward into this path, what do you think about for the people that are, you know, feel they've been duped and are trying to detransition? Would there be like retribution or like some kind of like course of action they could take against people that have like kind of ushered them down this path?
Absolutely not. Adults are adults, and we have to treat adults as adults, unless there's been fraud. Now, if there's been fraud or misrepresentations, then yeah, absolutely. I think a person should be able to sue for redress and damages. But simply because somebody feels like he got pushed along, or that the therapist or the doctor shouldn't have encouraged him, hey, we're all grown-ups, and you got to treat a grown-up like a grown-up. And so in the absence of fraud, I would say, no, you make your own decisions and you take responsibility for your own decisions.
Okay. The only thing that I would push back a little on is if someone's going distraught and putting themselves in the care of a medical professional or a clinician who, you know, has a lot of ethical responsibility for that person once they've come to them and they're kind of trusting them to help them. I do think that there should be a little bit of a burden on them to help someone make sure that it's the correct choice instead of just ushering them forward. I think they do have an ethical responsibility, just because that is kind of the purpose of their profession.
Oh, I don't have any problem with that. I'm just saying that a person that hires that doctor bears responsibility for it, and that he can do his research and he can go out and talk to other people and talk to other therapists. But once he hires that doctor and the doctor pushes him along, as you put it, he's got to bear responsibility for the consequences. But I agree with you. I think doctors have a moral duty to do what's right and what's in the best interest of their patients. And
Right.
so,
I
yeah.
think it almost comes down also to even like a true informed consent, because it seems like overall, just me, not even outside of the gender issue, that's a huge issue where people aren't getting true informed consent for anything that they're getting with the doctor.
Well, that's a tough issue, because I think adults should take responsibility for their actions, and they're the ones that choose the doctor.
Informed consent just means that they fully explain what the treatment is, what the risks are, because they're the ones that are educated in giving you the treatment, and then they're also supposed to tell you what other alternative options there are. That's just their legal responsibility. So you don't think that they should have to adhere to providing a true informed consent, that people need to find that information on their own and then can just agree or disagree based on their own cognizance?
I think it's a difficult issue. I mean, it goes back to the fraud issue. That fraud is not just the intentional misrepresentation of a fact. It can be the omission of an important fact, that when the person thinks that the person's relying on what he's saying and he omits pertinent facts, then I think absolutely the patient should be able to sue the doctor for omitting important facts. But if the doctor is fully disclosing everything, and again, if he's not, then I think you get into that area of fraud. But if he is, then it's up to the patient to take responsibility for his actions. He can walk away from this. There's the gray areas, as you're pointing out, as to what exactly informed consent is. What is the doctor's role in this? I mean, that's the judicial process.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to ask that because it just sort of came up in my mind when we were going on to that. Unless Albert or Greg wanted to follow up on the gender stuff, I was going to ask something different.
Oh, I have other questions though.
Okay.
Alright.
Someone else can jump in and ask a couple questions.
Okay, is it my turn?
Yeah,
Sure.
go ahead.
Okay, yeah, hi, Jacob. Yeah, great information, many interesting comments. Yeah, I have about 5 questions. I'm looking for your best concise answer, but if there's more to say, feel free to do so. First, I'm a Catholic too, and I have been bewildered actually, why so many Catholics seem to be political progressives, Democrats. 53% of Catholics voted for Joe Biden. What do you think the explanation for that might be, especially when it's a requirement that Catholics abide by the natural law, and the natural law does promote liberty, as we're talking today? Why are so many Catholics Democrats?
Well, I would also ask, why are so many Catholics Republicans? I mean, why are Catholics statists? I think it's this notion that, unfortunately, people look to government as an alternative God, even if they don't recognize it. That's the whole idea of the welfare state programs, is that when God needs a partner, that we can't just have faith and freedom of people on, let's say, for example, on Social Security, that we can't have faith that children and grandchildren will honor mother and father on a voluntary basis. That's just too much asking of Catholics, that we can't trust God in that sense. So we need an alternative God, a co-God of Caesar, where Caesar's going to say, well, you know, children and grandchildren might not come through, so we need this coercive apparatus to force people to be good and caring. And then they couch that in terms of, oh, well, we're just doing God's will. Well, you're not doing God's will. You're actually doing contrary to God's will, because God's will is voluntarism, and that's the attraction of the cross. Nobody is forced to the cross by Jesus Christ. They're drawn to him voluntarily. And then, but the reason I raise Republicans is that, you know, you've got this massive warfare state. I mean, this is what Martin Luther King called the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. That Republicans love the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, the assassinations. I mean, think state-sponsored assassinations that they're engaged in right now. Sanctions that are killing innocent people. Look at the embargo against Cuba, and yet Catholics support this type of thing. I remember in my church, during the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, they were exhorting people to pray for the troops. And I'm sitting there saying, oh my gosh, we're supporting we're praying for the aggressors. So about once a year, I would write to the priest, the head priest in my church, and I would say, can you explain to me why we never pray for the victims? It seems to me that if you're going to pray for the aggressors, you ought to at least pray for the victims. And of course, I never got a response from him. And so your question is a very astute one. But I will say this: if there is ever a moral awakening among Christians, and they come to the realization that the welfare state is contrary to the laws of God, and the warfare state that is run by the national security state, which is run by the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, are contrary to the laws of God, and immigration controls are contrary to the laws of God, and drug laws are contrary to the laws of God, I think you're going to see a moral awakening in this country that will absolutely shake the foundations of this country toward liberty. And that's what I keep hoping and praying for.
Yeah, interesting. Good answer. I don't want to go back to immigration too much, but this question, I'm going to include 3 questions into one statement here. Is there any an analogy that I've heard is that we all have locks on our front door, and that's because we want guests to come in at our, with our permission, and we give them hospitality, as we choose. So I've heard the analogy of having a lock on our front door with the same concept of the border, that we should have a lock on the border. So my question is this: is there any valid libertarian perspective, a libertarian perspective that would, in your view, be acceptable of having a very secured, lockdown border? Or do you think having a firm border is simply contrary to the libertarian point of view?
If you live in a place like Cuba, where the government owns everything, or North Korea, where the government owns everything, then it would be logical for people to think in terms of that this is a national home, and that the government is the owner of the home, and therefore the government should be able to have this lock on the gate. I would oppose it because I oppose socialism entirely, but at least there would be a strange kind of logic to that. That is not what we have here in the United States. The United States was founded on the principles of private property, not socialism. Now, there are government-owned national forests and parks and so forth, but primarily we are a private property society. That means that you in your home can put a lock on your gate or a lock on your door, and put a lock and a fence all around your boundary lines. And every libertarian in the world, including me, would say you have a right to keep out anybody you want. It's your private property. You're the king in this castle here. And if you want to discriminate against blacks and whites and Catholics and Jews or Muslims or whoever, you got that right. The same thing with a business. I hold that a private business is just like a private home, and that a business owner ought to be able to run it any way he wants. If he wants to keep out Catholics, Jews, Muslims, blacks, Chinese or whatever, he's got that right to do it. By the same token, consumers have a right to say, we're going to boycott your business and ostracize you and try to put you out of business because of your bigotry. However, you have no right to keep me from inviting who I want in my home. So if I want to invite Mexicans or Jews or Muslims or Catholics or Arabs or whoever, that is my right. It's my private property. It's same with my business. If I want to invite anybody I want, that's a private property order. When you put a lock on the gate, which is immigration controls effectively, you are interfering with my right of private property, my freedom of association, my liberty of contract, and my religious principles of being able to associate with anyone in the world I want. So that's why I reject this analogy of this lock on the gate.
So there isn't a public dimension of Americans owning America, but that's okay. I'm going to move on to my next question. My next question has two parts to it, and that is, do you think that the libertarian position, and it's been accused of being utopian, that it lacks some important practical dimensions, or in its application, it lacks some practicality in some respects? Combine that, for example, I should say, in Portland, Oregon, Seattle, and in San Francisco, the city councils are beginning to reevaluate this whole free drugs thing. Now, or legalized drugs. Everyone take whatever drugs you want. It's totally legal. That would be the libertarian point of view. But as a practical matter, they're seeing that it doesn't work. Increased crime, increased drug use, and a variety of other problems. An example of the ideal of libertarianism not working in practical terms, in practical ways. Is libertarianism utopian? And what do you say about Portland reversing these? All drugs are legal because they see there are practical implications that are bad for the town, bad for the state. Go ahead.
No, I don't see it as utopian at all. In fact, it's very real and very practical, because let me give you my favorite period of time in history, and that's from around 1870 to about 1910. Utopian means incapable of being able to be achieved. And it's sort of like some pie in the sky type paradigm. During this 30-year period of time, this is real world stuff. Now, I'm not saying it was a perfectly libertarian panacea, because it wasn't. But let me just give you some examples. No income tax whatsoever. People were free to accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth, and there was nothing the government could do about it. Open immigration. No drug laws at all anywhere in the country. No gun control. No Social Security. No Medicare. No Medicaid. No socialism. No minimum wage laws. Virtually no economic regulations at all. I think that's a good enough start. So if they're able to, oh, by the way, it was the most prosperous nation in history. And not only that, it was also the most charitable nation in history. So that shows you that if they could do it, it's not utopian, because it already happened. And that's why I keep saying, let's start there and then build on it, because they proved that you can do it. Now, when you've got a drug war that's been going on for decades all across the country, we can see the results of that. It's been horrific with the violence and the driving drugs underground and the deaths. I mean, most people who die of drug overdoses are dying of corrupted drugs on the black market. They're not dying of overdoses. It's because the black market doesn't produce sound drugs. You can't go sue these people. It's been an absolute horrific experiment. It's really worse than prohibition. And so when you ended prohibition, do you end the alcohol problem? Of course not. I mean, today you've got an alcohol problem. You got a drug problem. You're going to have societal problems. There's no question. And when you have one or two states that are legalizing drugs, the probability is that the drug addicts in other states are going to move into that area, which is going to aggravate the problem. And so it looks like, oh my gosh, this is really bad, because in the other states it's still a felony to be consuming these drugs. You also have this huge homelessness problem that it is combined in this, that is a direct result of zoning laws. I mean, when these people are addicts, what are they supposed to do? Where are they supposed to get a home? They're not allowed to get a home because you've got zoning laws that keep out trailer parks or multifamily housing where a lot of people can move into a house. You've got minimum wage laws that prevent them from working. So when you've got all these other regulations that are aggravating the problem, the easy thing to do is say, oh, well, we need to return to punishing people for being addicts, for ingesting substances that they're not supposed to ingest. You know, Milton Friedman once said that even if the free market produced poverty instead of wealth, he would still favor the free market because he favors freedom. And even if ending drug laws really made the situation worse, I would still favor the repeal because I want to live in a free society, Greg. And a free society necessarily means you got a right to ingest whatever you want to ingest. And if we were to legalize drugs all across the board, there's no question in my mind that things would settle down. It wouldn't be concentrated in Seattle or Portland, or the only states there who have legalized recreational drugs. You got to get rid of this thing entirely across the board, and things start settling down. And then you start treating addicts as human beings, where they seek treatment, they get sound drugs, solid drugs in a pharmacy instead of the corrupted drugs and the corrupted needles. And we start treating addiction as a moral thing. I mean, not a moral thing, but as a treatment type thing rather than a criminal justice thing.
Very good. Two more questions. You mentioned something earlier that really delighted me a little bit, because I didn't know anyone else had ever had this thought. I actually have written an article on the fact that unauthorized practice of law regulations, that being that only lawyers can provide legal information, is extremely unethical and marginalizes 80% of the public while driving up legal fees $300-400 an hour. I've got many things to say about unauthorized practice of law being unethical and very, very damaging. I've written an article on it, and you were talking about regulations and occupational monopolies, because that's what some of these regulations establish. In the case of lawyers, because of unauthorized practice of law, they have an occupational monopoly. And in my view, that's the only reason they're able to charge $300-400 an hour, not because they're worth it. in an open market, lawyers could charge probably between $80 and $125 an hour, according to our studies. So they are dramatically overpriced precisely because of government regulation. So, and in addition, to repeat, it marginalizes the public from accessing the judicial system. Ordinary folks cannot pay somebody $300-400 an hour to do something fairly routine in the courts, but those are the fees we're facing. Do you favor abolishing unauthorized practice of law regulations?
Absolutely. And what you're saying is just music to my ears. The whole licensing of lawyers is, they say that this is how we ensure ethical, competent lawyers. Well, I can tell you, and I'm sure you've had this experience, there are plenty of licensed, unethical, incompetent lawyers out there.
Yeah, right. At $300 an hour.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. It's just a racket, Greg. It's just an absolute racket to keep the fees higher. Like you say, the hourly fees, $300. I know some lawyers charging $600. But, a person could be a paralegal and prepare a divorce petition for $25 or $50 and get an uncontested divorce through. If she or he tries to do that, the bar association goes to court and gets them shut down immediately because she's taking business away from a lawyer that's going to charge $500 for the same thing. It's just a racket. Every licensure racket. And America lived without occupational licensure for more than 100 years. And Milton Friedman, he wrote a great essay on this that said he dealt with the toughest issue of doctors. He didn't go with the shoe shine people or the hairdresser people. He thought that's too easy. Let's go with the toughest one, the occupational licensure of doctors. And it's a fantastic essay. It's called, I think, Medical Licensure. I think it's in his book, Capitalism and Freedom. I'm not sure, but you can find it online. But he made the principal case for getting rid of occupational licensure for healthcare providers, including doctors. And if you understand the principles there, everything falls into place. Lawyers, doctors, the rest of the people that are having to get licenses.
Very good, very good. Last question. To a newcomer to the Libertarian Party or libertarian thinking, what book or a couple of books might you recommend?
Oh, wow. That's a fascinating question. I would say Bastiat's The Law. I would start there. And then I'd also go into any of the other books that Bastiat wrote. I think Bastiat is one. Bastiat was for people who are viewing, if they're not familiar with, Frederick Bastiat was a 19th century free market libertarian legislator. And he wrote just remarkable things of economic principles and the law and natural law. And his little book called The Law is just priceless. I also would recommend a book called Economic. You have Bastiat's The Law.
Yeah, I have it. Yes, that's a very good recommendation. Very good.
All right, then I'd recommend. No, that's okay. I'm glad you reaffirmed what I said or affirmed it. There's Economic Policy, a little book by Ludwig von Mises. And it's a series of speeches he gave in Argentina in the 1950s that is an absolute perfect synopsis of libertarian economics and what is known as Austrian economics. And so I'd start with those two. Any books by Ludwig von Mises, I would recommend. Any books by Friedrich Hayek, I would recommend. Milton Friedman. There's a great, Friedman did a series called Free to Choose that is absolutely fantastic. It's timeless. It's a video series. Well, he also wrote a great book called Free to Choose that I recommend also. Now, these all deal with economics, trying to think of the moral case for liberty. Well, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education was a man named Leonard Read. And I once wrote an essay for that foundation called Leonard Read Changed My Life. And I would say that Leonard Read has been the biggest influence for me for libertarianism of any other writer. And I would recommend any books by Leonard Read. He was just a phenomenal writer, very deep and very profound. So those are the books that are coming to mind. I'm trying to think of of things that would relate to what you do with natural law. And there's a great book by Bernard Segan called Economic Liberties in the Constitution. That Segan was a law professor at the University of San Diego, and this book is fantastic for people that are interested in the law background of economic liberties in the Constitution. There's also a fantastic book by a guy named Twiss called How Laissez-Faire Came to the Supreme Court, which delves into the Supreme Court decisions on natural law and fundamental rights and substantive due process. That it's out of print, but if you can find it, it's fantastic, especially for people that are interested in the law background on this. So those are the things that come to mind.
Very good. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah, I must
Thank
say,
you. Appreciate the good
I
message.
totally concur that Free to Choose and Frederick Bastiat's The Law are absolute great books. I mean, they really influenced my philosophical development early on. But I'd like to ask you a few additional questions. One on your view of the Dobbs decision reversing Roe versus Wade, and I'm assuming that you approve of that decision. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do. I don't think the federal government had any role in this at all, and it's now left at the state level. I'm not sure anybody's ever going to be really happy at all, but it's going to be by majority vote, and that's just the way it is, and that's the way it is. And I don't think the federal government has any role in this whatsoever.
But assuming that you're a state legislator, would you approve of the states putting restrictions on doctors performing abortions?
Yeah, I mean, as a Catholic, I believe that life begins at conception. And in fact, I have no doubt about that. And so I am pro-life. But of all the issues, since I discovered libertarianism, it's always been this issue that has been the most difficult for me. All the others have just fallen into place. And so as a pro-life libertarian, I do believe the state has a role to protect human life. And I believe that the fetus is human life. The problem comes in with respect to punishment. And that's where I've always had a difficult time is where does the punishment lie? Because I just don't feel comfortable punishing somebody that undergoes an abortion like I would a premeditated murder. And it's difficult for me to reconcile that. I'll be real honest with you. But, the abortion issue involves people that are following the dictates of their conscience. Some people legitimately do not believe that life begins at conception. It's very difficult for me to think in terms that that's as egregious as premeditated murder as somebody that goes out and commits a murder. So, and I don't know what the answer to that is. I've struggled with it for several decades and I still don't know the answer.
Yeah, I do think scientifically that, it's clear that life does begin at conception. But I think that many pro-life groups I don't know of any pro-life group that's actually in favor of punishing the woman. But they're in favor of putting restrictions on doctors. And they're the ones who are really the ones who perform the abortions. Obviously, the woman isn't performing the abortion, although she's undergoing one. So I think that's the right place to put the restriction on the doctor, and states can determine that. But and I do think, as you were saying, that states have different populations, and you can't really go against the will of the majority of any state. And there are certain state populations, such as New York or California, that are basically pro-abortion, and other states that are pro-life, like Alabama or Indiana. And you just have to let the chips fall where they may, based upon the popular will.
Yeah, I don't see any other choice. I mean, presumably a state could say we're going to legalize murder. We're not going to make it a criminal offense. And if the majority of the voters voted that way, what could you do about it?
Right.
I mean, then you have to just get your gun and be prepared to defend yourself.
Yeah. Moving towards Libertarian Party position on abortion. What would you say that the National Libertarian Party position or state Libertarian Party positions on that sensitive topic should be, if any?
I think that the party's position should be to stay out of it and let each libertarian make the call on his own, including the candidates, because you have a wide range of candidates that are taking different positions. And the reason I say this is that, you know, when I served on the platform committee, it was pro-choice. And I would say at that time in the 90s, it was probably like 35-65, maybe 60-40. But I would have people come up to me who were conservatives and saying, I could never support your party because it's pro-choice. And I would always explain to them, I said, well, yeah, if officially it is, but I should point out that 35 to 40% are pro-life. And so there's a split in the party. Well, rather than having to explain that, I think you're better off just the party does not take any official position by majority vote and just lets each libertarian make the call for himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to a certain extent, it makes sense for the National Libertarian Party not to take a position because, again, at the national level, the federal government constitutionally, a good argument can be made, should not be taking a position on abortion because that's an area that had been previously reserved exclusively for the states. But the state libertarian parties could take a position one way or another based upon you know, the composition of their particular party.
They could. I mean, but you get back to the same problem that I was enunciating, that the state party is, you know, 60-40 one way or the other, and you end up identifying the party with that position when a large sector of the party is not of that position. To me, you're better off taking the same position you do nationally. Just do not take an official position as a collective entity and let each party member make the call on an individual basis.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just moving on to a foreign policy issue. Do you have, I'm sure that you're against foreign aid, period, in general, but do you have any particular view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, my position on foreign aid and foreign intervention is different than my opponents in this race, and it's different from what's been outlined for 20 years by LP presidential candidates. I mean, everybody opposes foreign interventionism, so I would bring all the troops home and discharge them into the private sector. They're not necessary. Abandon all foreign military bases, including Guantanamo Bay, maybe especially Guantanamo Bay. Ban all foreign aid, lift all sanctions and embargoes. In other words, no coups, no state-sponsored assassinations. In other words, no more foreign interventionism whatsoever. I also, though, would dismantle the national security state. And this is what distinguishes my campaign from my opponents. I never hear them emphasizing this. They always want to end the foreign wars and the foreign aid. But the root of the problem here is the national security state. It was the worst mistake America ever made. This is the federal killing machine that we're living under. We got founded as a limited government republic with just a small basic military force. And that is a totally different governmental structure from a national security state. A national security state is a totalitarian form of governmental structure. So they have the power to kill, despite the fact that the Bill of Rights prohibits the power to murder people. But they can assassinate anybody they want. And that's the cause of the forever wars. And the guy, another person who recognized this was Frank Church, who was famous with the Church Committee that uncovered all the CIA's assassination plots, or at least many of them. And Church was a fierce opponent of the Vietnam War, but he pointed out, he says, it's not enough to get out of Vietnam, because the national security establishment is going to start another one, and then another one, and another one. And that's how we've lived under perpetual war. So my emphasis, and on my website at jacobforliberty.com, where you don't find this emphasis in any of my opponents or any track record. I wrote a book called The Evil of the National Security State. My emphasis is, if you want to end these forever wars, you've got to get rid of this national security state. If you leave the national security state, you can rail against these forever wars till you're blue in the face, and it won't do any good, because they continue to start these things one after another. Notice that right after getting out of Afghanistan, they pull the trigger on their proxy war in Ukraine. They've got this thing mastered to justify their existence and their ever-growing largesse. Now, as far as the Israel-Gaza situation, yes, I oppose all foreign aid to Israel, to Gaza, to everybody around the world. I really have tried to avoid embroiling myself in foreign war, the wars between other nations, as I've advanced libertarianism over the years. And the reason is because I want to keep the focus of the American people on what we need to do here to get a free society. And by getting distracted and saying, okay, the Israelis should not be treating the Gazans like this. There should be one nation where they all live together, which is what I believe. I mean, if you want me to delve into that issue, I see absolutely no reason why Jews can't live with Palestinians and all in one nation. I mean, they do here. I mean, you know, people live together here, Jews, Muslims, Arabs, Catholics, nobody's killing each other. So you could do the same thing there. You could even leave it as a Jewish state. The reason Israel's scared of doing that is because they're scared that the Arabs will outnumber them and then change the nature of the Jewish state. Well, you could have a settlement where you guarantee that Jews will have the prime spots in the government. If Palestinians could have equal rights to start families, I mean, have businesses, prosper, in other words, equal treatment under the law, they would trade away the government any day of the week to Jews to be able to live a normal life. And I think that's the ultimate solution to this thing. Whether, you know, Israel, you know, is obviously responding in a very, very overdriven manner against Gaza. It's the same thing what the U.S. did with Afghanistan and Iraq in response to the 9/11 attacks. But I don't like to stay focused over there. I like to keep people focused over here on what we need to do to get a free society and premier. And this is what I put on my website. I'm running, and when I announced my candidacy last February, a year ago, I said I'm running for two reasons. Number one, I want to be free. And number two, I want to end this federal killing machine. I mean, this violates every Christian principle. These state-sponsored assassinations, sanctions where we're trying to kill people through starvation and impoverishment. It's just horrific. And so that's where I keep my focus is what do we need to do to achieve freedom here at home?
Okay, thank you for your response. I want to ask Jessica and also Dennis if y'all have any questions you'd like to ask.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Kara had to leave, but the one major question we had left was really, what are your goals for your campaign? So, do you see yourself winning the nomination? Do you see yourself winning the presidency? And what do you hope that the American public would get out of your campaign?
Well, I'm swimming upstream. I mean, for at least 20 years now, we've had this message in this party of reform. Reform Social Security, reform Medicare, school vouchers, improve the public school system with educational reform like vouchers, reform the military, reform the CIA, reform. And that's not good enough for me. I want freedom. I want to experience the life of a free man before I pass from this earth. Ever since I discovered libertarianism, that's what I have felt like. God gave me one life, and I only have one life to live, and it would be very nice to live it as a genuinely free person. And so that's why I'm running, because this reform message that has come to define this party is not freedom. Any more than reform of slavery would have meant freedom for slaves. freedom necessarily entails a dismantling of infringements on freedom. All the socialist projects, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, my opponents have a 25-year plan for continuing Social Security because they say that if you dismantle this program today, there'd be people dying in the streets. That's nonsense. Freedom brings out the best in mankind. You can rely on children and grandchildren to honor mother and father on a voluntary basis instead of through this coercive apparatus. So, so that's the primary reason I'm running. The secondary reason is that, well, I want to end this killing machine that the federal government has. But this message that has come to define this party, and the reason I say I'm swimming upstream like those salmon in the Northwest is because I am not just seeking the nomination. To win this nomination, I have to shift 51% of the party to this principle, to the genuine principles of libertarianism, the founding principles: open borders, no more immigration reform, abolish these socialist programs immediately, legalize all drugs from fentanyl on down, dismantle the national security state, separate money in the church in the state, reject school vouchers, and separate healthcare in the state, reject FDA reform and Centers for Disease Reform. Okay, I'm swimming upstream with this message. I'm not naive. I have a very difficult task. I'm getting a lot of pushback, but I expected that. I mean, I knew what I was getting into, but that's the only way I can win this nomination, if I can shift. But I have an argument in my favor that my opponents can't dispute. It's an indisputable fact. Their message cannot garner votes. And that's a problem for a political party when your message cannot garner votes. And we know this. It's indisputable. None of my opponents can deny this. 3 years ago, our presidential candidate gets barely over 1%. And now we've got 2 Wall Street Journal polls that show 1%. I mean, that's essentially saying that 99% of the American people are saying, we don't care how dissatisfied we are with Biden and Trump. We're not voting for you because they don't like our message. And I don't like our message either. I'm with the 99%. And now there's a brand new poll out of California by California State University that shows the Libertarian Party presidential candidate is now down to 0. So my argument is, look, 1% or 0 is not going to cut it. Not for me, because I want to be free. You're not going to get free at 1%. You got to break into the 10 to 15% category to put freedom in play. And that's what I want to do. And it is my contention that it is only a campaign of pure libertarian principles that can do that. Because I contend that there is a constituency out there. They may not join our party, but they will vote for our package of principles. And the reason I say this is I ran for U.S. Senate 20 years ago with the same package of principles. I ran against one of the most popular governors in the history of the state, John Warner. And I knew that I would not get one Republican vote, and I didn't care. The Democrats didn't run anybody, but I knew that I wouldn't get their votes because I'm calling for the repeal of public schooling, Social Security, Medicare. They weren't going to vote for me. They ended up voting for the LaRouche. I got 7% of the statewide vote with this message. And this is before a lot of people even knew what libertarianism was, because there are people out there that love this package of principles. I've said for 30 years, our libertarian principles are our greatest asset. And I have no doubts that that constituency is out there. And I could double that 20 years later, given the advances we've made. And if we get to 10 to 15%, now freedom is in play. Now I got a shot to have a free life before I pass from this earth and move into heaven, hopefully. And that's my goal in this campaign, is to raise people's vision to what a free society is. If all we do is advocate reform, like school vouchers, for example, how does anybody ever think of separating school and state if they never hear the idea? You've got to present the idea of freedom for them to do that. And that's then how you shift a society. You reach a critical mass of people, you hit that 10 to 15%, and all of a sudden, freedom is in play. And that's my objective here.
So I guess I have a follow-up on that as well. If you could be king for a day, what would you do within the country, the government of our country, but also what would you do within the party?
Well, the country, I would immediately pardon every single nonviolent offender. drug offenders, immigration offenders, empty the prisons of all nonviolent offenders. Of course, I'd also immediately pardon Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Ross Ulbricht. I would bring all the troops home from overseas. That's the prerogative of the president. He's a commander in chief. Just order them home, abandon all those foreign military bases, and discharge them, and then start closing domestic military bases. We have this whole empire of bases, both foreign and domestic, and I often hear my opponents talking about those foreign bases, but we've got an empire of bases domestically. What are they good for? What are they? I mean, like, they're just sitting there. They do no good at all. And the soldiers are sitting around these bases twiddling their thumbs. Get rid of them and privatize them. If the debt ceiling comes up, refuse to go along with raising the debt ceiling. That's one of the prerogatives of a president, is to say, no, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling. And they say, well, we're going to have to shut down the government. Okay, shut it down. So the president does have some prerogatives here that he can make a significant difference. So, in the hypothetical world you're talking about, those are some of the things I would do. And as far as the party's concerned, I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
Jessica, you there?
Yeah, I might have cut out right at the end there. So the second part would be, if you could be, king for a day of the Libertarian Party, what changes would you make there? You mentioned a platform plank you'd worked on earlier, and I know they're working again now, but would you make any changes to our platform, or would you change our messaging style, or are there any other big changes that you would make if you could be king for a day?
I think the most important thing the Libertarian Party could ever do is restore our genuine founding principles and reject reform measures entirely. Because, like I said before, reform measures are not freedom at all. The real reason why this became the standard message of the party was that the party decided that our principles were liabilities. They were albatrosses. And I remember this on the platform committee. There were people coming in saying, these principles are costing us votes. We need to delete them. We need to water them down. Well, it was pure nonsense. But what they were doing was they were looking toward Republicans. They were Republicans who had come in and they thought, well, to get Republican votes, we need to water down these principles because Republicans will never accept the radical nature of libertarianism. Well, of course, it's never worked because we're still at 1%, and Republicans are never going to cross party lines to vote for a libertarian. I mean, you see this phenomenon where you hear people saying, and my opponent saying, this is the party of Ron Paul. This is the party of Ron Paul. Well, it isn't the party of Ron Paul. I mean, nobody has more esteem and respect for and admiration for Ron Paul than I do. I mean, I think this guy's a libertarian treasure. But when he got this big surge of votes, he was a Republican. Those big surge of voters were Republicans. The thought that those Republicans were going to come over and vote for the Libertarian Party presidential candidate if we watered down our message on immigration, Social Security, Medicare, etc., was a fantasy. It was a pipe dream. And so we ended up abandoning our principles. And you see it now. If you go to a training session of LP candidates for Congress, for example, they'll have a speaker on vouchers. They'll have a speaker on health savings accounts. I think that what you need to go back and train candidates in is how to present the case for genuine libertarianism, the principled case, and bring in speakers that train people to make this case instead of the case for reform. On the platform, they ended up watering down provisions. If you go back to the 1990 platform when I joined, it was a hardcore libertarian manifesto: abolish Social Security, abolish Medicare, open the borders. It was phenomenal. I mean, I wasn't going to join the party because I thought it was just going to be a watered down manifesto. And the guy that invited me to join the platform committee said, let me send you the platform. And I was stunned. Abolish the CIA and the FBI. Well, those are two planks, just to give you an example. They were deleted somewhere along the way. I don't know what year they were deleted because they offended Republicans. And now, so you've got a plank. The CIA is the most evil agency in the history of this country. It is pure evil. And yet there is no plank in there that calls for the abolition of this agency. They must have uncorked the champagne bottles when that plank got deleted, because now there's no political party that's calling for the abolition of this evil agency. Now, with Trump calling for the abolition of the FBI, the right wingers in our party now feel comfortable calling for the abolition of the FBI. But before Trump, it was like, oh no, we can't call for the abolition of the FBI. This is a national police force that is engaged in COINTELPRO, secret files, blackmail. It has no role in a free society. So those are some of the things that I think the Libertarian Party should do. Restore principle to this party. Even if it did end up with 1%, at least you're out there advocating what liberty is all about. You're letting people know what liberty is about. Reform is not liberty. Liberty is the dismantling of infringements on freedom. So you got to make the competent case. For example, on open borders, how many libertarian candidates can make a competent, moral, religious, economic case for open borders? I would venture to say not very many, because the Libertarian Party hierarchy has never emphasized training them on how to do that. That's the major thing I would say the party ought to shift to, restoring the genuine founding principle of this party and training candidates how to make the competent case for them.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that was a really good stopping point. Thank you very much for agreeing to the interview, and we wish you a good ride home. And sorry that you have to do the interview in circumstances by the side of the road, but we really appreciate your willingness to do so.
It was great. It all worked out. I appreciate y'all having me, and thank you so much for all your time and your fantastic questions, and appreciate the honor of you guys, feeling that that you wanted to interview me. I'm very grateful and very honored. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you guys have a good evening.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Have a good evening.